Okay. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming tonight. Can you hear me at the back? At the back, great. I'm Mariota Spence. I'm a member of Refugee Action Collective Victoria. I'd like to start by acknowledging the true owners of the lands we're on, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. As tonight we discuss the treatment of refugees by the Australian government, we acknowledge how the colonisation, genocide and repression of First Nations people of Australia are part of this wider system of ongoing oppression. Tonight we are discussing cruelty at the heart of Australia's visa system, including the treatment of Palestinian refugees since the latest war in Gaza, and the ongoing cruelty of the temporary visa system and the wider system of visas in Australia. We'll hear from 3 excellent speakers, who I'll introduce in a moment, before we move to questions from the floor and a discussion. We look forward to hearing from many voices tonight, and we will do our best when we open to the floor to hear from as many of you here as possible. I want to make clear that as we discuss these issues, that in this space tonight, we won't tolerate any form of discrimination towards anyone at all based on their nationality, ethnicity, religion, nothing. Not towards our speakers, not towards anyone in the crowd. For this to be a productive discussion where people can speak openly, we must keep the basis of respect for one another. Now I'm excited to introduce our speakers. Yousef Alreemawi is a Palestinian Australian writer, musician, and refugee advocate. Sadaf Teymornejad is a refugee advocate with lived experience of Australia's visa system and is currently a Neuroscience PhD student at Monash University. And Senator Steph Hodgins-May is a Greens representative for Victoria, elected earlier this year. We'll hear from each speaker before we move to questions and discussion. And yeah, let's give a round of applause for it. And over to you, Yousef.
Thank you, Mary. I want to speak quickly about the 6 realities of the Palestinian people. Today, the Palestinians are 14 million in population. Each and every one of them has been imposed under one of 6 realities: political, military, economic, social realities, administrative reality imposed on us. We were not consulted against our will, depending on where these 14 millions are. The first reality affecting 2.2 million Palestinians in Gaza, and that's a reality of blockade and siege and war every second year, and now genocide. The second reality is the reality of Palestinians in West Bank, affecting 2.8 million Palestinians in West Bank. And that's the reality of direct military occupation, which means soldiers, settlers, separation wall that they call security fence, settlements, blockade, you just name it. Third reality in Jerusalem, which is different, because what Israel wants out of Jerusalem is not necessarily what it wants from West Bank. West Bank is blocking any future Palestinian state. In Jerusalem, it's annexation. So the reality of the Palestinians in Jerusalem, which is 0.4 million Palestinians, is reality of marginalization and Judaization and revoking permanent residency, in addition to direct military occupation. And the fourth reality affecting nearly 2 million Palestinian holders of Israeli passports. And these are citizens of the state of Israel, but nevertheless, they are 5th-class citizens after European Jews, Easterner Jews, Russian/Ukrainian Jews, Falasha Jews from Ethiopia, and then comes the Arabs, and the Arabs themselves are in their own hierarchy. And then the 5th reality is the reality that we will be talking about today. It's the reality that affecting those who are the descendants of people who were ethnically cleansed in 1948. I know that some of these descendants do live in maybe occupied territories like in West Bank, or occupied and sieged territory like in Gaza, but the majority of them are in Lebanon and Syria and Jordan and basically diaspora. And then there is the first wave of statelessness that took us to what we call the necklace countries, Arabic word for necklace, دول الطوق. That's the countries that have common borders with Palestine. And then the far countries, which is basically the Gulf countries and Iraq and now Australia. So the reality here is denial of return. You will never Israel will never implement UN resolutions. And then whatever happens to this group of people is not our business. Yes, we made them refugees. Yes, we deny them return. And yes, we interfere in the Middle East conflicts, like we've seen in the last, every conflict in the Middle East, we know Israel has been a direct or indirect player in. And we will go after them, and we will go after their leaders, and we will bomb their refugee camps, and we will do massacres like Sabra and Shatila camp in 1982, and we'll do other massacres like Yarmouk. It's a long list of Israel's interference in the Middle East instabilities, but we'll never let them return. And now comes the question, where is Australia in that? So let's not talk about Australian foreign policy. Let's talk about Australian resettlement of genuine refugees. And I'm talking genuine refugees because every refugee who flees from war is genuine. But if you were born as a refugee, then your authenticity, your genuinity. Shall I allow? Keep going? Okay. So authentic, they were born refugees. Myself, I was born to 2 refugees. My father was 3-year-old on Nakba from today's Israel. My mother was born a year after Nakba from the city of Safad in the north. And then their family, their kids were born as a second generation refugee. So by birth, I was born as a refugee. And then my future children will be 3rd generation, etc. So what happens is that Australia does not have a clear and transparent policy towards treatment of refugees in general and Palestinian refugees in particular. Why? Because there is the P word, the Palestine word, where the alarm bells will keep going off. And, us Australians in general, the bureaucrats are nice people, friendly people, but their system is gigantic. And when you have an alarming issue like the Palestinian issue, then they might be intimidated from, going public. So they have to do everything silently without, provoking. So in general, this is my observation of the Australian way of treatment of Palestinian refugees. And I feel lucky and proud to have a first-hand experience. So what happened is I came to Australia in 2003 as a Palestinian of Jordanian passport. And it was a year or 2 after 9/11. So all of a sudden I was seen by the state as a member of the Muslim community, not the Palestinian, not the Arab, and not just Muslim, the Sunni, and not just the Sunni, the probably potential Salafi because he's coming from Saudi Arabia, and not just Salafi, maybe the jihadi Salafi, especially that he's on crutches. So we don't know what he did to his leg when he came here. So there was like, okay, and then you find yourself in that situation. And then the moment you start talking about Palestine, then there is, I came to learn the hard way that there was something called the flagging policy that the Howard government introduced in 2002 after 9/11. And flagging means that if there is in Australia a person on a visa, not permanent residency, not a citizen, and then you think that this person might be of a potential headache to Australia in 5, in 10 years, in 20 years, maybe put a flag next to his or her name. Eventually, that person will come back to us to renew the current visa or call for another visa or permanent residency. And when he or she comes, then reapply the requirement of whatever visa, but the harshest way. And then when they reapply the requirement of student visa renewal, I did not qualify for medical reasons. I was told you are medically unfit to remain a student in Australia for your polio. And of course, it sounds horrible, especially when I didn't know that there is more behind the story. And of course, now I'm trying to cut a long story short. So I learned the hard way that the Department of Immigration, and I could be corrected by experts on law, could be one of few departments, if not the only department in Australia that did not sign the Anti-Discrimination Act of 1992. which means it's not illegal for the Department of Immigration to discriminate on age, on religion, on race, on disability, on anything. And when they do that, they get away with it. And when you sue them, you are not going to win. So it's not illegal for Australia to discriminate if you happen to be from the wrong basket. And so that's the first thing. The second thing is that by the time I started building myself in education and in media, teaching Arabic language and culture at Deakin University and Melbourne University, and I also started a radio program that's still going. It's called Palestine Remembered, which is Australia's only radio program in English language on Palestine. And we are celebrating the 20th anniversary of that. I don't know how it survived for 20 years. Now, from there, I came to be aware of the plight of ex-Iraq Palestinians. I don't know how I'm going with time because...
5 minutes or
okay.
so, okay.
So I came to be aware of the treatment of ex-Iraq Palestinians who fled sectarian violence. After the fall of Saddam in 2003, violence spread in Iraq. It wasn't about Palestinians, it was more sectarian than targeting Palestinians. And the Palestinians were seen as Sunnis, and they were targeted by radical Shias, just like innocent Shias were targeted by radical Sunni groups like Al-Qaeda, and then they were caught in this kind of sectarian violence. Now, what happened is that we came to know what happens when Palestinian refugees become refugees again. And that is something that needs to be highlighted. When there is a problem, like the birth of the Palestinian refugee problem in 1948, this should be a temporary problem. But what happens when the temporary becomes permanent? A fountain of bad things will happen. Things will be decomposing, and also it's itself, an area of study. So what happens is when ex-Iraq Palestinians fled to the neighboring countries, which is Jordan and Syria, these two Arab countries treated the mainstream refugees fleeing the same violence in one way, but they treated the Palestinians from that part of the world in another way. So they were denied entry to Jordan and to Syria, unlike the majority of Iraqis who were able to go to to Jordan and Syria. So first they were not treated equally. So they were second-class refugees. And then, because of some paperwork requirement, which is the fact that they were not enrolled in UNRWA. Have you heard of the UNRWA? UNRWA, United Nations Relief and Work Agency, a UN body that was founded in 1949 for the Palestinian refugees, but not for their return, for their relief and work, for their medical and education. So because they were not registered in UNRWA for political reasons, we might talk about later, I'm happy to elaborate in the question time, the Palestinian Iraqis were easily registered in UNHCR, the United Nations High Commission for Refugees. And because they were registered in UNHCR, Australia saw them as genuine refugees, because there is an 842 offshore humanitarian program form. If you want to apply to Australia from offshore, you will have to fill in a form called 842. And in that form, there is a question: are you registered with UNHCR? If you said no, they will not even continue looking at your application. So they are registered, and we were able to translate the documents of some of them, and we were able to bring out of that misery 45 families in 4 years. And then came the question of the crisis in Syria. So the violence in Iraq affected 30,000 Palestinians, but the violence in Syria affected 500,000 Palestinians. And the same thing happened. The neighboring countries treated the Syrians in one way and treated the Palestinian Syrians in another way. But the problem is that this group of people are already registered in UNRWA, which means they missed out on registration of UNHCR, which means they were not seen by Australian state and government as genuine refugees, which means they missed out on resettlement, which means that we had zero success since for all the forms that we tried to fill for the ex-Syria Palestinians. And then we came to know that because of the government, that back then it was the shift from Labour to Liberal, there was an undeclared policy of basically excluding the mainstream group from Syria, which is Arab Sunni. So if you are Arab Christian or Arab non-Sunni, then maybe yes. If you are Sunni non-Arab like the Kurd, then yes. But if you have the two, then combo, then no. And the Palestinians fell into the cracks of laws for paperwork, and they missed out on the resettlement program. And we brought it to the attention of the government, the parliament. We did a motion thanks to members of parliament like Maria Van Bacchino, and she had no luck in changing the policy. So I'm trying to, this is, and the final example now will come back to the current issue, the people from Gaza. The people, when Australia tried to look at papers of Palestinians fleeing Iraq or Palestinians from Syria, so there was no political tension. It was like more administrative, more legal paralysis than politically motivated. But if the doer of the perpetrator of their suffering is Israel, I mean the current doer, because Israel is the root of the whole thing. But because now Gaza, there is Israel involved, now we have the difficulty of what we do as Australia when it comes to the treatment of ex-Gaza Palestinians. There is the declared policy and there is the undeclared policy that can go declared if someone like Peter Dutton talk about it, which we shouldn't. I mean, they were trying not to talk about it, but somebody brings it up, so then all of a sudden it becomes a public issue. So the undeclared policy is the ethnic cleansing of Palestine, basically. That's how it started. And unfortunately, Australia is one of the friends of Israel. And now what Israel wants to achieve out of the whole thing is less Arabs, more Jewish migrants. So less Palestinians. And let's now use the core essence of genocide is ethnic cleansing. It's not about Hamas. So Netanyahu's talking to his friends and say like, if 200,000 Palestinians will speak to our friends in America and UK, in Australia and in Europe, if Australia can take 20 to 50,000, then we'll be able to bring the number from 2.2 million Palestinians in Gaza to something like 1.5. And Australia seems to be cooperative, but not if you bring it to the media. And now all of a sudden, then we have to talk about it. So the context of this is Australia in general, and I will end here. Sorry if I took longer. Australia in general does not have a transparent policy when it comes to the treatment of any refugees in the world. The Immigration Department is not a signatory of anti-discrimination law of 1992. And it will continue to discriminate if they choose to, based on religion and sects. And myself, it took me 6 years to get my permanent residency, because I ticked 2 boxes, person with disability and also an activist for Palestine. I'm like, oh my God, that's like, but luckily I remained around for this year, for this 6 years. And then eventually they got sick of me and then they gave me the PR. But I got 9 out of 9 in the IELTS exam. In the English test, I scored 9 out of 9 in the speaking. So I had all the points, all the scores, but it prolongs or decline or destroys your application sometimes if you are from the wrong basket, whether it's disability or ethnicity or religion or all of them. So that they are not transparent, but when it comes to the Palestinians, it becomes, if they are fleeing Syria, we have a situation of legal paralysis, and it's the fault of these 2 big UN bodies, the UNHCR and the UNRWA. They should speak to each other and fix the problem and allow the Palestinians fleeing Syria for the same reason to be treated like Syrians, not to miss out on the resettlement of third country like Australia. But when it comes to the political part, if Israel is involved, because now it's a genocide, so it activates the alarm bells, and Australian bureaucrats are not ready to handle. They make, in fact, and I will end with this. I think one of the successes of the Zionist propaganda in Australia and around the world is that it created a form of self-censorship. Self-censorship. Nobody's going to come after you if you say something or you write something, but you choose to be intimidated and you choose to exclude Palestinians from equal opportunities. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that and educating us as well, Yousef. It's really valuable to hear, especially as in the news at the moment, it's possibly worse than ever, although it's been terrible for a very long time. I'm really pleased as well that tonight we have Sadaf here, who's able to speak to the system beyond the treatment. I mean, thank you for speaking about the treatment of all refugees, not just Palestinians. But we also have Sadaf here, who has lived experience and is a refugee advocate to speak to the broader system as well. So it's Sadaf Teymornejad. Thank you.
Thank you everyone for being here today. My name is Sadaf, as mentioned. I'm currently a Neuroscience PhD student at Monash University, and I'm also a teaching associate. And I would like to begin by giving you a background of how I got here. I was born in Iran. My family and I, including my parents and my 2 siblings, fled to Australia in 2013 when I was only 13 years old and my siblings only 8. As many of you may be aware, the beautiful country of Iran that I used to call home is now being ruled by a government that's very conservative, extremely religious and repressive, and holds no regard to human rights. And anyone who speaks against the regime it often faces discrimination, harassments, violent arrests, and possibly prosecution. Now, thanks to technology in recent years, the world is starting to see the crimes that are being committed by the government against the citizens, especially the women. So my family is one of the families that have experienced this firsthand, and my parents decided to flee the country. We were forced to flee the country, and they essentially refused to raise their daughters in a country that sentences women who refuse to put a headscarf on with death. So we came to Australia, in a country that allows us to be who we are and to not be scared of expressing ourselves, which is exactly what I'm doing tonight. So we are grateful for all of this and everything that Australia has given us, all the things that our birth country couldn't give. But I'm now 25 years old, and it's been almost 12 years since I've arrived. I'm still on the same temporary visa, still an asylum seeker, waiting on an outcome on our humanitarian visa application. Many don't know the struggles of being an asylum seeker in Australia, so I'll tell you a little bit about my journey. When we got here, I was just a child. I didn't know what migration truly meant. Leaving everything and everyone you love behind and being thrown into a completely different world. I'm sure that some of you would know about trying to fit in, but as a kid in high school who looked different, sounded different, it was a time of my life where I felt like I was forced to grow up quickly. I tried my best to learn English as fast as I could because I wanted to do well in school, and I was very academically driven. I attended many university open days and I was so excited to begin, but when application time came around, I was told many times that I couldn't go to university. And then eventually I was told that I could only go as an international student being subject to international fees. So there stood $185,000 between me and a degree. And my world as a bright-eyed student essentially came crashing down. It hurt because my hardworking parents were taxpayers, but I couldn't use HECS, and my visa didn't allow me to borrow a loan. So there was no way for me to pursue my studies. But I understood that this is the reality of my situation, and it was up to me to face the challenges and be grateful for the opportunities I was given. I was able to graduate with a high ATAR. I got a scholarship, finished my bachelor's degree with honours with a high distinction from Monash University. I then continued the same process to get accepted into a PhD program. Again, understood the challenges, worked hard to gain another scholarship. During the same time, I was also competing as a Taekwondo fighter. I had my black belt. I'd even got a gold medal in Victorian Championships. I wanted to travel to compete internationally and represent Australia, but I was unable to overcome the obstacle because my visa doesn't allow me to leave the country or travel anywhere. And again, I understood it was a sacrifice of circumstances. Despite working very hard to come to terms with many challenges I've faced in my life, one thing I still struggle to understand is the government's approach to the visa system. Before the 2013 federal election, the coalition announced a plan to assess protection claims more quickly. So the fast track system and the removal process was introduced. This process involved 4 key steps: triaging the caseload, rapid assessment, rapid review, and rapid removal. In theory, it seemed like a great process to be able to address the backlog of cases, but the process for determining whether a person is a refugee is complex and difficult. And the implemented tight timeframes simply did not allow for a fair assessment of these cases. The system has now been acknowledged both internationally and by the Labour government as neither fair, thorough, nor robust, which is precisely the reason why the fast-track system was abolished in July of this year. But what about the errors that were made along the way? The cases that were rejected and the lives that have been impacted. Many people that haven't been allowed to work, study, see their loved ones, or say goodbye to them when they passed away. We have lived alongside Australians, paid our taxes to our community, and contributed to our society. All we ask for is recognition of the struggles we have endured. To bring attention to this and the 10,000 people who have been left behind and left in limbo for over 12 years, we have set up a protest camp on 12th of July in Melbourne. This is still ongoing outside of the Department of Home Affairs and now being supported by many people across states and cities in Sydney, Adelaide, and Brisbane. Many have slept on sidewalks during cold, rainy days for over 40 days for their concerns to be heard. As a collective, we are striving to draw the government's attention to the need for reconsideration of those who were unfairly rejected by a system that was publicly abandoned due to its failures. We are not asking for special treatment. We're simply asking the Australian government to ensure that they rectify the issues created by the flawed fast-track system. Ignoring the issues will not help any of us. We should work together to resolve it. This will allow those of us who have been overlooked to demonstrate our continued commitment to this beautiful land by granting us the permanent visas we have long sought. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sadaf, for so beautifully telling us your story and telling us the story of many thousands who are in the same position as you as well. And now as we move over to Steph, speaking of this encampment that's been going for over a month now, there has often been a sense that these protesters and many of us advocates here who have been many times, that they're crying out into the ether, not being responded to, that the government doesn't want to hear it, but it's an inconvenient time ahead of an election for people to ask for their human rights in this country. So I'm very keen now to hear what Senator Steph Hodgins-May has to say about the work that you're doing in your government.
Thank you so much, and thank you, Yousef and Sadaf, for those really powerful words. I don't want to use my full 10 minutes because I want to hear more from these wonderful speakers in the question and answer. But I'd like to begin by acknowledging that we're meeting on stolen land and pay my deep respects to the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people of the Kulin Nations, acknowledge the elders past and present, and also acknowledge any First Nations people who are joining us here tonight or online. Thank you also to the Refugee Action Collective for hosting this event and so many other wonderful events that just keeps these issues being spoken about when the major parties don't want them to be spoken about. When I hear you both speak, I just imagine, like, you know, the richness, not having the richness of your experience, your poetry, your writing, and the knowledge and skills that you're bringing through your PhD in neuroscience. Like, come on, these are phenomenal people that we need more of in this country. And, you know, our rich migrant and culture and history is something that we should be so proud of and that we should be fighting for more of. Yeah, I've been a senator in the Victorian Parliament only since May, so I'm quite fresh. But immigration, refugee, asylum seeker issues have been very close to my heart for a long time. My partner in 1992, my mother-in-law fled Bosnia to escape the conflict with her suitcase and a few words of English and her 3 boys after her husband, a journalist, was killed in the war. Really, it's because of her bravery and her fortitude and unwillingness to accept the system that I now have 2 beautiful kids and a partner who works in asylum seeker advocacy as well. So it's an issue at the dinner table every single night of the week, and it often ends with a lot of table banging. So basically, I was going to have a little bit of a chat about the visa system so far and really some of the inequities that we're experiencing. We all know about the disgusting rhetoric that is being peddled by Peter Dutton, and honestly, can you think of another human who could visit a war zone and come back and double down and be more harsh than when before you visited that war zone? That's our opposition leader. And so while Peter Dutton's dog whistling and punching down on people fleeing policies, the Australian government are only marginally better, and there are many examples of where they're worse. Since October, more than 10,000 Palestinians have applied for a visa, and almost all of them have close associations or family here in Australia. We found out recently via Senator David Shoebridge, who's the Greens immigration spokesperson, that since October, over 7,000 of those visas have been rejected. And even more recently, we've noticed that it's dropped off cataclysmically, like they're now accepting about 1 in 10 visas. Where's the humanity in that? You know, like they say that they want a ceasefire and they say that they care, but none of their action is matching their rhetoric. Basically, what they've done is their initial advice was to tell people to apply for a travel, like a holiday visa, and without, I think, thinking this process through, they quickly withdrew that information off their website. We still have copies of that information, though, that they provided on their website. They said, apply for that visa, come here, and then we'll organise another visa. So get your tourist visa and we'll sort you out when you get here. But that simply hasn't happened. And, you know, our assumption is that they thought maybe that this conflict wasn't going to go on for as long as it did, and that tourist visas for a short period of time might suffice. And it's only now they're realising the protracted nature of this genocide that they're realising that tourist visas aren't the right vehicle. But these people are applying for tourist visas and they're rejecting them because there's no prospect of them returning to their country, which is one of the key criteria that a visa is judged on. So, you know, we look at the wider immigration context and we saw a markedly different response to Ukraine and under a federal Liberal government, you know, pardon me. We saw them create a unique visa category that recognised that they were fleeing a war zone and that gave these people these people access to work, to Medicare, to the sorts of things that enable them to live in a dignified life while they get their visa application considered further. And I think that program was shut down by the Albanese government in 2022. And really what the Greens will continue to call for is a visa category that recognises the genocide that it's occurring and supports these people a safe pathway for Palestinian refugees to this country that allows them to live without relying on charity. You know, we're hearing about Palestinian families that are living in 1-bedroom houses with other families and sharing one bathroom between 5 Palestinian family members and then the Australian family members. And it's absolutely outrageous that is the state of play and that they're rejecting 9 in 10 of these visas but telling us they care. The Greens believe that Australia's cultural, ethnic and linguistic diversity should be celebrated. We've long campaigned for refugee rights and the only party that's called for an end to offshore detention, another stain on Australia's history. You know, we almost celebrated when we saw Nauru, all of the refugees on Nauru being brought to Australia. But this year, under an Albanese government, we've seen another 50 or so transported back to Nauru. We've got those in Papua New Guinea who are, you know, stateless, who cannot return to their country of birth or previous citizenship, and Australia won't accept them, and they're languishing in Papua New Guinea with no rights. The money's dried up that the Australian government had given them, and the Australian government just wipes their hands and says, not our problem. You know, these are broken families. These are men who can't even go through a visa process, were one to be created, because they're in such ill health and you can only imagine, you know, the mental health of these people in offshore detention and how horrific it is. And of course, hearing from Sadaf, these lives in limbo while people are put on bridging visa after bridging visa. Bridging visas weren't created as a permanent visa category. They were seen as exactly what the term suggests, a bridge between one visa and another visa. And, you know, we're seeing business owners who have been on bridging visas and started local businesses in Brunswick and Inner North, who then one day get the phone call, oh, sorry, you're no longer entitled to work, and they have to shut shop. Families with kids in schools who all of a sudden get a call to say, sorry, we've changed the terms of your bridging visa. You no longer have those rights. And I just think the resilience that it takes to come to this country and the urgency of people, like the immense, you know, threat that you must be under to leave your family behind and to leave everything you know behind and travel to a new country is a resilience that we can and should be welcoming. Talk more about the Greens plan, but I'm not going to, because I suspect that it comes through in what I'm saying is that we need to increase our humanitarian intake. We need to create that visa class that allows more Palestinians to get out of Gaza and to have a safe passage here. We can, of those, I think 2,000 or 3,000 visas that have been granted by the Australian government, only 1,500 or so of those Palestinians have actually been able to get out of the country because of the blockade. So it's a drop in the ocean. I suppose I'm going to end with a call to action. Really, the major parties have failed us time and time again. I ran in lower house elections previously in one of the most marginal seats in the country in Macnamara, and I sat next to the Labor candidate for the last two elections next to that candidate, while he guaranteed people in that room that Labor were going to make things better, that they were going to, he said, I know that the official party wasn't, but hinted at ending offshore detention, increasing the humanitarian intake and treating people with dignity. Yet we've seen a complete reversal of that. So my call to action is to look at the seat you live in. There are no such things as safe seats in this country anymore, and particularly in inner Melbourne. We've got an election in the next 12 months. It'll be between now and May next year. And we just have to organise, and because the only thing that's going to shift the major parties is money, as we see through their corporate donors, or it's their vote shifting. And they don't see this as a vote shifting issue, clearly, or they might be showing a little more compassion. We need to organise. We need to join your local group, whether it's like an independent that you want to get behind, or it's a Green, or someone who's sort of talking about the policies that are going to make people's lives better and recognise the humanitarian crises that are happening right across the world, and just give it everything you've got. Because here in, I think, is this Federal Melbourne, we've got Samantha Ratnam running in Wills, who has been just such a champion for the Palestinian cause and would make an exceptional member of Parliament. We are so close off minority government because, frankly, that's the only way we're going to get change, is if it's not one of the major parties with complete dominance in the federal Parliament. So get active, campaign, contact your local member, apply any pressure you can, visit the protesters at the Home Affairs office, who I'm planning to visit on Thursday. So I hope that we can have as much solidarity with those people as we can, because we're fighting an uphill battle, but we're going to win it, because compassion and humanity will win eventually if we organise. And thank you for having me here tonight. And I look forward to hearing more from our two wonderful panelists.
Thank you so much, Steph. And it was really great to hear your call to action, especially because it's so easy when things are so bad in the world and in our country, to feel powerless and to feel hopeless. And while things probably, there's no overnight success ever, we have to always keep fighting for, in the really long term, reminding ourselves of the power that we do have in a democracy, getting involved where we can, whether it's locally or in more national movements, really has a lot more power than it's easy to forget the power that we have. And at the end of tonight, we'll talk to a few more ways that you can get involved with the refugee movement if you would like to as well. So we're at 20 past now, we've got till 8. Does anyone have any questions for any of our amazing speakers? Yes, Matt.
I've got a question that might go to both Yousef and Steph. Under the Refugee Convention, we have this prohibition on return to grave danger, the prohibition on refoulement. thought, I might have misheard you, you said that some people were getting refused the visa because they couldn't return. And could you clarify that, did I get it right? And Steph, these 9 out of 10 who Palestinians who are being refused a visa, and they absolutely can't return, what does Australia say they do? That'll do for now.
Australia does not even process the application of a Palestinian fleeing Syria, for example, currently in Lebanon, because when you apply to Australia, you will be you would have left Syria, let's say, and you are currently in Lebanon, in Turkey, in Jordan, in Egypt, in one of the neighboring countries to Syria. Now, they don't see the decline of the application as eventually, of course, it will mean that they will have to return to the area of danger, but it will not be Australia doing the refoulement. That case of refoulement happened in the cases of ex-Syria Palestinians 114 times in 2014 by Jordan, where some ex-Syria Palestinians fled to Jordan on foot, and then the government returned them to Syria, which is in violation of human rights, because there is a difference between deportation and refoulement. Deportation is sending them to Kuala Lumpur or Dubai. Refoulement is sending them to where the danger is. So Australia is indirectly doing that by denying them the means to apply, but for simply not having the UNHCR referral or registration. And on this note, I want to also highlight one important issue that often goes underrepresented or even unnoticed. The Australian government for the last 15, 20 years have been talking about, I have the figures in 2010 and 11 where they spoke, we accepted 13,000 refugees. The number 13,000. But if you scrutinize where the 13,000 refugees were accepted from, you will see that 3,000 of them were only UNHCR referrals. And 10,000 of them were those who came to Australia and overstayed. Their visas could be not necessarily, I accept any person to be resettled here, to have permanent residency here, but not from this intake. Because the majority of what Australia calls refugees are not necessarily UNHCR referral, which makes them not as genuine refugees as we might think, or as the Australian government want us to believe. So this is an area that I call experts in human rights, experts in law, experts, like we don't have their expertise to scrutinize behind the figures that the government is telling us, because we should not take them for granted.
Yeah, and in relation to the visitor visas, so basically because the government hadn't created a type of visa for Palestinians to apply for, they suggested apply for a visitor visa, then when you get to Australia, you can apply for a bridging visa. Originally, these visitor visas lasted 3 months, but because people are finding it so challenging to get out of Palestine, get out of Gaza, they extended that to a 12-month visitor visa, which is good in some respects, but then those same people who have managed to come to Australia are now on a visitor visa for 12 months, and you can't apply for another visa until that 12 months is expired. And that visitor visa carries no rights, no right to work, no right for medical assistance, anything like that. So they're in limbo, but also by virtue of the fact that they're applying for a visitor visa, and when they're assessed against the visitor visa criteria, it's becoming increasingly clear that these people aren't returning home imminently. They've been rejected. So that's why we saw sort of a spike at the start of visas being accepted, still a lot being rejected. As the conflict and the genocide continued, their claims for a visitor visa have been rejected far more frequently because they don't match the criteria of visitors, because they're not visitors. They're fleeing a war zone. So I suppose that's the kind of contradiction that exists at the moment, and why we're arguing that there needs to be a visa category that reflects the circumstances.
So they're here with no visa at all?
No, they're here with those who come here are here with a visitor visa for 12 months. Then they can apply for a bridging visa. But the issue is 9 out of 10 are being rejected because they're not visitors. Yet they're being told to apply for visitor visas.
Well, my question was about those who apply for a protection visa. I thought you said that
you can't apply for a protection visa. You can only apply for a bridging visa after 12 months.
Did you say that 9 out of 10 are being rejected?
Altogether, their visitor visas are being rejected. That's the category that they've been told to apply for. So I don't know.
I'll talk to you after.
Yeah, please. Thank you.
Yes, Helen.
Hi. Thank you, speakers, for wonderful speeches. Sadaf, question to Sadaf and Lady Steph. The encampment has been going on for 42 days now. Surely the Labor government has taken notice. Do you know if they're embarrassed? Do you know if they're moving behind the scenes to come to some sort of resolution? Maybe Steph might know in Parliament if they are getting a bit of heat.
Look, I don't think they're getting as much heat as they feel from Peter Dutton on these issues. Sadaf probably knows more about this than I do. Like, you never know what to think when a new minister comes in, but I had this, always looking for hope in this area. Like, as you know, like it's just one step forward, 2 steps back. But I sort of hoped that maybe Tony Burke might have a bit more resolve, given he's been around that joint for a long time and maybe wouldn't feel as threatened of Peter Dutton as maybe others have. But like we spoke about at the start, Helen, like I don't think anyone recognises that they have the capacity to change the narrative on these things, and they don't think there are votes to be won in it. So they're not shifting. I'd love to give a more hopeful message. But Sadaf, do you have a more hopeful message?
We were also hoping with the new minister that things would shift. I know that there has been an instance in Sydney, people are protesting outside of the new minister's office, and he did come outside and decided that he wanted to chat with them. So he chose a representative from, I think, either each. He chose representatives to speak to him, to bring him the issues and the requests. And that was the one and only time that we've heard anything not official, but unofficial from the current government. The overall hope is that they hear our voices, but there is no indication that they are hearing anything, at least nothing officially that gives us hope to continue. But everyone is dedicated to continue it until we get some sort of an outcome.
Does anyone else have any questions or any further lived experience they might like to share, if not a question? David?
Well, I suppose it's lived experience because we've all had to live through too many years of campaigning for refugee rights. I think it's very important to see that the key variable in whether or not we get outcomes is actually not who's in government. It's actually the scale of the movement, because the refugee movement has won real victories under the Liberal Party. We collectively, RAC was a component, but it was a much bigger movement than just us. We collectively got children and their parents off Nauru. We collectively got the Medivac refugees out of hotel detention. Those victories were won against coalition governments. It didn't come down to who had the votes in Parliament. It came down to the extent to which the government felt they had a problem and they had to solve it. And I think we've seen the same even with Labor's disgraceful approach over the last 2 and a bit years. The Billa family, they gave them permanent residency. Neil Parra, who walked to Sydney, and his family got permanent residency. Where they feel they have to give ground, we can win victories. And every time I'm down at the encampment, people say, "Do you think we're going to win?" And all I can say is, well, if you don't fight, you're guaranteed to lose. But you never know when you're pushing away at a brick wall when it's beginning to crumble behind the plaster. And I think even this government, if the movement is large enough and sustained enough, can feel that they have to make some kind of concession. So I don't think we have to wait for the next election. Minority government, majority. I mean, Julia Gillard had a minority government. There were 3 fairly progressive independents and Adam Bant who held that government together. And actually, the situation for refugees was not very good under Julia Gillard. And there was the Malaysia solution which fell to pieces, which would have involved sending refugees to Malaysia, which was obviously not a desired circumstance. So I suppose all I'm saying is we need to double and redouble our efforts to support the encampment, to support the Palestinian refugees, because at the end of the day, I think we have the power to actually impose outcomes on unwilling governments.
I would share a response and a fear that I would love it if I love to hear a hopeful response to, no pressure. But on that, I also believe in that we all have the power of our votes. We all have the power to pressure our local and federal politicians. But we have seen over the last 10 months a tremendous amount of popular support for Palestine. We've seen years of support for refugees. But as hearing these stories and these experiences tonight, it can feel as if we are just hitting a brick wall. Like, have all the Palestine protests had any impact, would you say?
I actually would like to propose a $1 million question, which is why Palestine? I'm sure most of, if not all of us, have heard this question at least once in the last 10 months when we started as Australians, particularly those who are not of Palestinian background, talk about Palestine around dinner tables, maybe in workplaces, on public transport or in cafes. What is it to you? Why Palestine? And why not Africa? Why not Congo? Why not Myanmar? Why single out one cause and not talk about every? And in fact, yes, we should talk about each and every place where there is injustice. But why Palestine? I would say that if we categorize those who have a view in public spheres to broadly, those who are sympathetic to the right, far right, or those who are maybe affiliated with the liberal values. For simplicity, let's say that these are the two broad categorizations. So let's not talk about far right, because I'm sure this is not an issue of, this is not the right place. So let's focus on those who subscribe to liberal values, maybe left-leaning, it doesn't matter. Now, within that, we have seen that there are people who have progressive views on climate change, which means that they want to do something for climate to stop the warming of the planet. And those who have also progressive views to the rights of minorities, whether these minorities could be migrant minorities, Muslim minorities, ethnic, religious, or LGBTQ, any minority. And those who might have progressive views on First Nations and their right and change the date and all that, and those who have progressive views on combating fascism and Islamophobia. But all of a sudden, when it comes to Palestine, they are either silent or even worse, pro-Israel. And that is why anthropology students and lecturers and scholars have invented a term called PEP, Progressive Except Palestine. You can look it up. There are articles and books and even Wikipedia page called Progressive Except Palestine. And we see that here in Australia, where, for example, in education, you go and see a research center that they were right on racism. They were right on rights of minorities, but we've been waiting for them to say anything on Palestine. They are silent, or media, or. So I think why Palestine? Because Palestine has become one of the moral tests of our time. Just like South Africa was the moral test of the 80s and 70s. Well, you're not going to believe a person who's lecturing us on progressive and liberation if their position is not sympathetic to the liberation of the Black movement in South Africa. Now Palestine has become the test. So why Palestine? Because it is the test of our time.
Would you mind if I say something? Okay.
Yes, sure.
Question.
She'll go to John.
Yeah.
Then.
Regarding Yousef, if you may allow me to call you Yousef.
Of course.
For me, the issue of Palestine came to a serious crisis when Yitzhak Rabin was shot dead by a nationalist fanatic, blah, blah, Zionist, blah, 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 blah.
Who are now in the government. The same line,
Very true.
Smotrich and
Netanyahu, Sharon,
Smotrich and
the
Ben
great,
Gvir.
I mean, I always sympathize with Yasser Arafat, which I think that he is the core of the Palestinian struggle, really the PLO.
Yeah.
Hamas is basically the offspring of Yasser Arafat.
Thank you, John. Many interesting points raised. I will just talk about one of them, which is the core of what I think the core issue of the current genocide. And I think it goes back to the demographia. At the end of 2021, it was the first time since the Palestinians to the west of the river, and we now hear about from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, and all of a sudden someone will start attacking you for saying this slogan and accusing you for being anti-Semitic, when in fact this is from the river to the sea. When we Palestinians, what we mean by from the river to the sea, this is my father's village from which he was driven in the middle of Palestine. And this is to the north of Palestine, my mother's village, my mother's town in Safad in the north. And what I mean by from the river to the sea is we want to return to these two spots between these two water borders. And I think what happened is it was in end of 2021, it was the first time that the Arabs, Palestinians, to the west of the river outnumbered the Jews. And it took us from 1948 to December 21, so that we went from 2/3 of Palestine were Arabs before Nakba, and because of the ethnic cleansing, we lost 0.9 million, so we became the minority, and it took us until 2021 when we outnumbered. And then this sparked a debate, and there was, if you want to read more about it, read the minutes of the conference. There was a conference called Herzliya Conference where they discussed the future of Zionism every year in Herzliya. And there was a debate between two sides in Israel. One will say, how do we respond to this kind of demographic time bomb? One voice was, let's revitalize the two-state solution and let them breed within the boundary of that state solution. Of course, it will be with no sovereignty, it will be with no control with border, we will keep the settlements, we will keep Jerusalem, and we will deny the return of refugees, but they can call it a state, they can put a flag, they can have passports, and then we can confine the demographic problem there. And then we can see what we can do within the Arab minority of Israel. So that's the first voice. The second voice was those who subscribe to the religious Zionism. And Zionism is not a religious movement. Zionism is a sectarian movement, but there was part of it, there was an element of Zionism is religious, but it went bigger as we speak, and now it's more of a mess now. We don't know. But what happened is that within that Zionist voice, there was like, no, let's not give them a state. Let's go back to what we call the unfinished job of the 1948, which means let's ethnically cleanse everybody. We did not do that. And this is the context of the genocide in Gaza. And that's why we all, I agree with one of the Israeli philosophers who says, I don't remember his name, I think his last name is Safran, where he says that the future of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict will not be determined in battlefields, but in bedrooms, meaning more babies, demography. So I won't reflect more on that.
Thank you. And when we're discussing these broader issues as well, in all of this, we have extremely vulnerable people who have been forced to flee, lost their homes, whose, for non-political reasons, they just want to survive, but their lives are politicized by this divisive debate. And its reasons for being divisive are more complex than we can explain tonight. And as we've heard from these other experiences tonight as well, there are it's a much broader system than just Palestinian refugees. And when it comes to Australia, we have this double standard and a selective humanity where some people are given refuge, some people are given asylum, and others are left to suffer for years or decades. We have another question regarding the specificities of visas. This is from Margaret. Would it be preferable to have an amnesty for people failed by the fast track rather than an agreement to reprocess the claims properly? It seems the simplest solution to a huge mess created by politicians. Does anyone here have a difference?
Yeah, look, I would actually defer to you. Yeah, I think that we, like, as an overarching principle, we need to increase our humanitarian intake dramatically. We play a significant role in a number of these. Yeah, our refugee intake we close our borders, increased only minimally over recent years. So, like as you pointed out, that the government, our current government, has pulled out the inadequacies and the deficiencies in the fast track process, yet and abolished it, yet are unwilling to look back and repair the damage that it's caused. So something's they either acknowledge that it's working and continue to work with it, or they end it and fix the mess that it established. That would be what you would think pragmatically would be the right thing to do, but I don't think the right thing to do really shapes their response. But yeah, what do you think?
I honestly, in terms of the visa, like amnesty stuff, I think it's so different from like this particular issue, like having abolished this fast track system or having it in the first place, and then us in this situation. I don't think the government knows exactly what they want to do, and this kind of is transferred to us because we don't know what we're eligible for. I have inquired about, can I get a student visa or can I go through a visa? No, in the system, I'm only that 13-year-old who came over. So it's just that they are not sure what happened, or okay, we got rid of the system, what didn't work, or let's address this. But it's just that they created the system because of the backlog, and then it didn't work. And there's now more backlog of reviews, and it's just the broken system that's not working, and they're not sure how to address it, so we're not sure how to address it, and it just follows up more and more and more. And it seems like it's been forgotten that there are people's lives in the middle of it. So we just want a solution to this issue. And after contributing so much to the community, to the society, and everybody who has made Australia their home, I think we deserve an end to this limbo. But yeah.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, just a sort of observation and a question to our three guests, maybe the Senator first. One of the observations I make is that the actual Department of Home Affairs, or Department of Immigration in particular, is dysfunctional. I think we've seen 20 years of government-led policy, but which means that anyone who had any sense of humanity, anyone who had a heart in that department, has been pushed out. And the people who have survived in that department are what we would call, in a nice word, hardliners, people who sort of have followed the Pizzorno mode that we saw, where he was actively campaigning and politicising the department. So I guess, in addition to challenging the policies that the government has, what pressure can be brought to bear on the actual function to remove the dysfunction in the department itself? Because from the way they run the immigration detention centres, from the pettiness, the petty bureaucracy, and the cruelty that is on top of the actual policy that is inflicted on people applying for visas or trying to update their visa status. To me, as just an observer and not being impacted, is that I see a dysfunctional infrastructure and a dysfunctional bureaucracy that amplifies the policy rather than mitigate it, actually adds to it. So yeah, I guess how can we address that issue as well?
Look, I really think that the culture is stemming from the political fray anyway. Like, they really have a lot of guidance from their responsible minister, and I completely agree with the dysfunction. We've called for border force to be abolished at consecutive elections. That was our 2022 platform. I wish I knew the answer. I don't know how we fix it other than from cultural change at the top and for resetting the narrative in a way that staff and employees support and can support, and basically result in greater efficiencies in getting through some of the backlogs and treating people as people rather than as numbers. So, you know, we scratch our heads every day and ask that exact question. Everyone has different theories of change, and I suppose you probably expect it from the politician, but I do believe that bringing greater pressure to bear in the parliament is, for me, like one of the most significant ways. Absolutely, community groups and organisations, civil society has an incredibly important role to play in that ecosystem. But for me, each Conservative person that we replace, or each person who isn't willing to commit to that transformation of our immigration system and that systemic change, each one of those we have less in the parliament, for me, is a step towards addressing that issue of, you know, broken department and cruel and punitive policies that don't work, but just give people a number and demonise them and hope that the issue goes away.
In Arabic, if I can,
please.
There is a proverb. I'll say it in Arabic first. بدنا العنب وما بدنا نخانق الناطور, which means what we want is the grapes. We don't want to fight the security guard guarding so we just want the grapes.
Yes.
And this is the approach I would be using with the government. Yes, it might be dysfunctional. Yes, it might be heartless, but I don't think the individuals of the people in the immigration department are evil. I still bet on their good heart, or some way we'll have to find commonality. And I think we have to use the system and maximize what's offered and minimize within their own rules. And for that, we should collaborate with human rights organizations that the government opens the door for more than it does for us. And I have an example with Amnesty International Australia, for example. When we advocated for the plight of ex-Syria and ex-Iraq Palestinians, it was not us speaking directly to the government. Everything was done via Amnesty International Australia. And I call from this place for every refugee support individual and organization to build bridges with the already existing organizations in Melbourne, in Sydney, in Perth, in Adelaide, and to bring the plight of their groups, and then together work towards bringing about the change. And I don't think, while what Stephanie has been, of course, I second everything you said, but until then, we'll have to do the, long journey type of, and I don't think media pressure will bring results, because the government might even be counterproductive.
Mm-hmm. I totally agree with that. I feel like as though when the successes that we've had with previous stories that you mentioned, they almost weren't on media. And then now that things get more popular, it's almost like when it's on media, it's worse. But it's not supposed to be that way. But it just feels like it's counterproductive.
It provokes them.
Yeah. And with the change of the system, they have to be willing to listen, and then we have to, as you said, communicate via agencies or like RAC, who the government is willing to listen to, and that just comes with community being together, being proactive, and bringing issues to the attention of people in the government who are willing to listen.
There were some amazing advocates in Parliament just last week, Abbas and Bethlehem, who are on bridging visas as well, and who were going through the fast track system. And they met with politicians of all persuasions and sat down and shared their personal stories. And you do see the shift in politicians when they have that opportunity to be face to face with an advocate. And tears were shared amongst people you wouldn't expect to share them. So that's absolutely that lived experience, and getting those stories in front of politicians is just so vital. It is expensive though to to do. And, you know, predictably, there are those who aren't willing to have their photo shared on on Facebook and so on. They want to do that quiet advocacy and quiet diplomacy. But I agree that, you know, there have been times when we've really tried not to talk about an issue at all because we've heard that there's some stuff going on quietly behind the scenes, and us bringing attention to it is really giving Dutton ammo and label a retreat. So we do need to pick our moments. Yeah.
Thank you. Tom, you had a question.
Yes, yeah, no, observation and a question. And I think also just a comment as well. Like, I think one of the most tragic events in the refugee movement was when the refugee movement demobilized after Rudd's election in 2007. We'd abolished offshore detention, and people had all their hopes in Rudd and Labour at that time, and they brought it all back because the whole politics of deterrence and the anti-refugee racism remained. It's so fantastic that the encampments have really inspired and grown the refugee movement again. So I think that's really important. I'm just struck by the kind of double-edged hypocrisy, Yousef, by your comment around flagging as well, that it's often the very same governments that are causing the refugee crisis, that are siding with the oppressor governments. I'm thinking about Sri Lanka. I know the Australian government has often sided with the oppressor in the Tamil genocide, and I think they introduced, and maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but they introduced the fast track system in response to Tamil refugees coming to Australia as well. There's also the obviously example of them following or joining the US in partnership in the war in Afghanistan, and then treating, we know Afghan refugees were on no visas, insecure visas for 12 years as well. And I think it's very much similar the case with Palestine in terms of spending that $170 million for an LBIT deal and then treating the Palestinian refugees appallingly, not letting people in, etc. My question is something that strikes me both in the history of general history is the role that unions have played in really funding for refugee rights. So we have the Left from Stay movement, we have nurses blocking the deportation of pediatra, we have the Kids Off All Off, where teachers walked out of schools, played a really critical part in that as well. What role do trade unions play in fighting for permanent visas or in fighting for Palestinian refugees?
We'll start with Sadaf or Yousef. Have you come across any significance of the trade unions in your experience as advocates?
I'm actually not very educated in this area, so I'll probably
State education.
Yeah.
I think, yes, of course, trade unions and unions in general and civil society has been a spearhead for the pro-Palestine movement in general, and also to the humanitarian part of the Palestinian advocacy. And I have to say that within the Palestinian advocacy movement in Melbourne or in Australia in general, there is less emphasis on humanitarian issues than there is on political issues. And I want to make a call for my fellow activists on Palestine. I know that they didn't forget it, but because there is more, the conflict is political.
Yeah.
And of course, we should focus on mobilizing and building a Palestinian lobby and also calling for action plans. And I second what Stephanie has said, because the next elections, we have to have a say when it comes to who did what and when it comes to the treatment of Palestinians. So yes, but while that is happening, we should focus on two underrepresented points. One of them is the humanitarian crisis, especially the treatment of Palestinians arriving to Australia from conflicts in the Middle East, like Syria, like Yemen, like Iraq, like Libya, and also from the genocide of Gaza. So, of course, we need to have more debate, more discussions, more actions on that. But also, I want to call for more towards awareness building, more toward knowledge building. And if you allow me to talk about my example, I don't want to sound like shamelessly promoting my project, because I have had, I'm going to do it anyway.
Do it, yeah, do it.
So what I did, thank you. So I started in March this year a series called Understanding Palestine, in response to this kind of vacuum within the Palestinian advocacy. And last Sunday, we celebrated 11th of the 11th. So we finished 11 lectures, and every lecture I take one topic and I go for 90 minutes. So, and trying to focus on the awareness, so spoke about the national identity of Palestinians, the posters and songs of resistance, the legacy of Palestinian poets like Mahmoud Darwish, and how Mahmoud Darwish saw Palestine, and how there were non-Palestinian messengers for Palestine, like the visual artist from Jordan, Natasha Lem'ani, and the Palestinian Iraqi musician Rawhi al-Khammash. So I think we need to focus on the humanitarian and awareness building, because it equips everyone in the room when the topic of Palestine is brought up around dinner tables with family members and friends. And then when the other side brings up an anti-Palestinian propaganda, then you're able to respond or you're able to refute it. So on this note, Yani, I think I want to thank the organizers for putting together such an important topic on this humanitarian issue, and I think we need to see more of that.
I would thank you so much, Yousef. I would just add to that and say that if you're encouraging people to learn about Palestine, I believe it's also important to keep bringing discussions back to the other crises across the world, including the treatment of women in Iran, including in Sudan, including there is no hierarchy when it comes to people being displaced, people losing their lives, people not being able to survive because of dictatorships or whatever the reason. I love bringing this focus to education and learning and sharing this knowledge. So anything you've learned tonight, if you can share it with other people back in your own communities, then that's helping the movement as well. So we had Helen and then Max.
Just quickly, I would like to shamelessly promote RAC in its education too. We do have street stalls where we have conversations about our current rule.
What is it called?
Street stalls.
Street
stalls. We nominate a particular area every week, and we set up a table, and our primary focus is to educate people about Australia's cruel visa system and refugee policy.
Excellent.
And we're specifically at the moment talking about the fast track system. And when we speak to people, they are absolutely floored. They don't know what's going on. They're thinking, okay, you pay taxes, you're fine, but you don't. And there's a cohort of people, refugees that have been here for 30 years. Generally, people out on the street don't know what's going on. And being kept in the dark is what's made the government emboldened to continue its cruel visa policies. And I think once people get to understand and recognise and come to forums like this and listen to what's going on, they do change their hearts and their minds, and it does show and reflect at the ballot. But as David mentioned, before the ballot actually happens, we need to continue our RAC stalls, to continue educating, leafleting, and finding out what the facts are, how some people are lesser in this country than that they should be.
Yeah, I hear a call to action if you want to help at a RAC stall too. Absolutely.
I have just 2 to 3 more calls to action as well. One is part of the work that we do with RAC is through fundraising. It enables us to do some of the support that we do, where most of the support is with our time. But there is a harp concert later. It's next month. There are leaflets over there if you'd like to find out about it. At the 24/7 encampment at the Office of Home Affairs in Docklands, you can go anytime, and your support is always greatly valued by those who are there. 2 particular times to go are every Friday at 5:30. There's a rally, and RAC will also be making, a number of us will be going on Thursday as well. We're expecting a visit from some officials from Canberra, and it's a valuable time for us to try and get the attention of potential decision makers on these issues. Thursday, we will be there at around midday, we'll slash all day. And that we can close there, I would just like to say a huge thank you so much to all of you, to Steph, Sadaf, and to Yousef. It's been amazing to hear your experiences. I'm so grateful for what you've taught us and for what you've encouraged us to do as well.
Can I, in 90 seconds,
Yeah, go.
finish? I want to share with you. No, it's actually a story that my uncle, who was born in 1948, told me. So he was born in the year of Nakba. And 3 years ago, as part of my book writing project, where I speak to the Nakba survivors, and I speak to their sons and daughters and their grandsons and granddaughters, I spoke with him about his story, and then I asked him a tough question. What's the happiest day of your life, and what's the saddest day of your life? I'm not going to tell you the saddest day of his life, but I will tell you in 1 minute the happiest day of his life. He said, when I was in grade 4, I was in a refugee camp near Jericho. I grew up in that inhumane refugee camp where the conditions are appalling, like any other refugee camps. But I kept hearing about our home in Palestine, about our land in Majd al-Sadiq, about, the sound of wheat and the sound of air breeze and, and the landscapes of Palestine. But I was living in that refugee camp. So you can imagine the contrast between the reality and the stories. And then when I was in year 4, and then came the teacher on one of the days and said, boys, I have a good news. Today, there's no teaching. We are going to go on a bus and we are going to go on an, excursion. And what happened was that an American activist came in 1954 to West Bank, and he came and spoke to the principal of the school, and he said, let's take the kids out. And he hired some buses, and he had budget for lunch, for soft drinks, and that was when my uncle saw Palestine. He saw Palestine. He saw the rest of West Bank. He saw Jerusalem. He saw Ramallah. He saw Bethlehem. And he saw where he was from. And he said, it was the first time that I drink fizzy drinks. He remembers, of course, Bibsi. We don't have a P in Arabic. We had Bibsi. And to him, that pro-Palestine, non-Palestinian activist gave him the happiest day of his life. And he told me that story when he was about 80 years old. So do not belittle what you do for Palestine. Do not feel whatever we're doing is insignificant. It is actually significant, because the Palestinians now know that they are no longer alone fighting this injustice. And one of you gave one of us the happiest day of his life. Thank you.
Very final statement. If you'd like to join RAC, speak to me or David or Helen, and we meet every Monday and we can be part of this movement. Thank you so much. Good night, everyone.
Thank you.